Hello and welcome to this podcast from the Free to Disagree campaign, where we're going to discuss the announcement this afternoon by Cabinet Secretary for Justice Humza Yousaf on the Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Bill and changes which the government is prepared to make to the legislation. Today's announcement was the biggest development on the Hate Crime Bill in a little while, following months of pressure on the government from various groups, including the police and lawyers and academics and civil liberties groups, to amend controversial stirring up of hatred offences in Part 2 of the Hate Crime Bill. Today, Mr Yousaf said that the government was prepared to change the wording of likely and to remove that wording and to ensure that for a stirring up of hatred offence to be committed, the person who commits the offence must intend to stir up hatred. That is a concern that's been raised by many groups over the last few months, and it's a welcome step by the government, definitely a step in the right direction. We think intent is absolutely crucial in criminal legislation and in this kind of offence that he's outlining. So let's just listen to what he said this afternoon.
I think it's important to put the concerns over the question of the operation of the new offences beyond doubt. I can advise that the Scottish Government will therefore lodge Stage 2 amendments to the bill to make the new stirring up hatred offences intent only.
So as the Free to Disagree campaign, we welcome this statement by Humza Yousaf and the requirement for intent. We think that's an important thing to have. However, it does not change the numerous other problems with the stirring up offences that have been identified by our campaign and other groups over the last few months. Noticeably, there's still no free speech provision on transgender issues. There's no dwelling defence, so the offences cover words spoken at the dinner table in the privacy of your own home. The language of the provisions is still problematic. The term abusive, for example, which can mean rude and insulting, would make a very low threshold for offending. And the term hatred itself is something which is vague and subjective and which, when put in criminal legislation, is going to be difficult for prosecutors and the police and others to understand. So our position as a campaign remains unchanged. We think there are many problems with the stirring up offences which still need to be addressed, and the most straightforward way for the government to address these problems is to simply remove the stirring up offences, Part 2 of the Hate Crime Bill, altogether. So as the Parliament moves to scrutinise the legislation, as the Justice Committee first begins to look at these offences, that would be what we urge them to do. The problems with the provisions, the stirring up provisions which we've outlined, are incredibly complex. They're problems which will take a lot of thinking about, and problems which ultimately you might not be able to find a satisfactory solution to, which balances civil liberties, the rights to free speech and free expression, against the need to deal with crimes motivated by hatred. And crucially, something which we keep trying to point out is that there's no evidence that these new offences are needed to plug a gap in legislation, or that they will actually reduce the number of hate-related attacks which happen in practice or give extra protection to victims. So the remaining fears over free speech and the fact that the stirring up offences are not evidenced to help victims means that the best thing to do is just to scrap them. And that's what we will be calling on committee MSPs to do and calling on other MSPs to push for over the next few months. Another important point to stress is that the Justice Committee, which will be looking at the Hate Crime Bill, is already under a great deal of pressure. It's looking at other complex pieces of legislation, such as new legislation on defamation law, and it's working on a very short timetable because there aren't many months left until the Holyrood election next year, and parties will be gearing up to contest that election. And of course, all of this is happening in the context of a wider coronavirus pandemic, a crisis in national life, which demands a lot of effort and time and energy, quite rightly, from our politicians on dealing with the effects of the pandemic and on trying to keep the public safe. So all of this means that the best solution for the government, for MSPs in general, is to withdraw Part 2 of the bill, the stirring up offences, which are controversial, which are complex, which throw up a lot of problems and demand a lot of time and energy. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you to all the supporters of Free to Disagree, those of you who subscribe to our mailing list and who've been faithfully sharing our social media posts and making your views known through writing to your politicians and doing other things which we've asked you to do. It's been an incredible help. It's made an incredible difference. Let's not forget that the government has come under sustained pressure from expert groups, but also from the public. And that's been evident with the responses to the Justice Committee consultation, almost 2,000 responses, unprecedented. And also in the statements of MSPs at Holyrood, where they have cited letters from constituents about the hate crime bill. So you are making a difference, and please continue taking this action, writing to MSPs, outlining the concerns which you have and which we have about the hate crime bill, and hopefully in the next few months we can see a satisfactory outcome.